Well, NAACP National is involved. Why? Because a load of bodies keeps popping up inside of a particular prison system. Also, a woman has her baby, she births on the floor of a prison. They let her do this. This is insanity. Put up the pictures full mess. Let me explain to you what's happening. Let me take you to the NAACP, the Department of Justice. They are urging the Department of Justice to launch a probe in the Broward County, Florida Sheriff's Office. Now, we've talked about the sheriff before. We've talked about this state many times. They are now citing, the NAACP is citing an alarming number of deaths inside of the jails. In a January 29th letter to Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Kristen Clarke, NAACP President Derrick Johnson alerted the DOJ that 21 people have died. 21 have died in the facility since 2021. That number, however, jumps to 80 deaths if you start counting from 2011. These are controlled environments. This is not supposed to happen. Per the Atlanta Black Star, people who have mental illness make up a significant amount of those cases, Johnson argued. And among these incidents are a string of suicides and alleged abuse at the hands of jail staff. He called on the agency to look into the conditions, the management, and whether inmates are receiving adequate medical and psychiatric treatment in the jails, which he described as dangerous. Johnson said in his statement, and I quote, "The NAACP is horrified by the continued injustice that Broward County families have been forced to endure. Make no mistake, every jurisdiction is responsible for the safety and well-being of any detained persons in their custody," end quote. Johnson mentions 42-year-old Kevin Desir, who died in a Broward County Sheriff deputy's custody January 2021. An independent autopsy determined his death was homicide by manual strangulation. He was in the custody of a deputy. Homicide was the cause of death by strangulation, was the method. His family filed a lawsuit late August accusing deputies of excessive force and outlining the alleged pattern of poor care inside the jails. Mr. Desir, who had bipolar disorder, was housed in the North Broward Bureau when he had a mental health crisis. The Sun Sentinel reported staff discovered that he had cut himself, was not communicating clearly, and was naked inside his cell, which was inundated with water. A struggle between the officers and Mr. Desir led him to be placed in a restraint chair where he was struck, tased, and pepper sprayed multiple times. He suddenly became unresponsive, and the medical team attempted CPR as well as other resuscitation methods. Desir was transported to a local hospital, passed away days later. His family called for accountability, and the force used against him was unreasonable, unnecessary, gratuitous, and punitive, meaning they were doing it as retaliation. That's per the Sun Sentinel. Another grim story mentioned was that of Tammy Jackson, a woman with bipolar schizophrenia who gave birth alone inside of her jail cell without help from one staff member, nobody. That's per CNN. Her lawyer said after nearly 7 hours, she delivered the baby in April 2019 with no doctor, no medication. They argued Jackson, whose screams were reportedly heard throughout the entire unit of that jail, was neglected and the child's life was put at risk. The incident led to the Tammy Jackson Act, a whole law, June of 2020, which calls for pregnant inmates who go into labor to be transported to a hospital. Sadly, Ms. Jackson died 18 months after that ordeal. Details of her death remain unclear. President Johnson further said in his statement, quote, "The Broward County Sheriff's Department has failed its community. Now it's time for our Justice Department to intervene and ensure that this tragic pattern of negligence is addressed and any bad actors are held accountable. The NAACP is unrelenting in our work to ensure that justice prevails and every person is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." The Justice Department acknowledged Thursday February 1st, that it has received the NAACP's request, but declined to say whether an investigation will be open. Monitoring by the Associated Press shows that about a dozen state prison and local jail systems are currently under federal investigation nationwide. We are responsible for one of those investigations, that Indisputable, the one in Alabama, by way of U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff. Alabama is having a very similar crisis. There's more. NAACP Broward County President Marsha Ellison on the left emphasized that an internal investigation is insufficient, saying per Wink TV, quote, "We don't want to hear. We've investigated ourselves and found that we've done nothing wrong. We want to find out what's really happening. I don't honestly believe and trust and don't trust the process of internal sheriff's office to investigate themselves." Per the AP, Ellison has also said Sheriff Gregory Toney and his staff are often not transparent about the circumstances surrounding fatalities. Now her proclamation is so important because she's a local person. She's the person that alerts President Johnson, national president of the NAACP. She's the person that gets the office, the headquarters, all the information, evidence, et cetera, they need in order to make a public statement. So she knows way more than anybody else. I'm glad she's a champion for the people locally. You're very lucky to have her in Broward County. All right, we're gonna follow the story, obviously, and see what the DOJ does. Naturally, the DOJ will never say, oh yes, we're investigating now, because they don't want to ever appear as if they're taking direction from the NAACP. So understand that. That's always a move by a federal agency. They would never acquiesce to a Black organization during this time. You may see an investigation later in the year, but they will claim it's unconnected, not connected to the letter, all right? Whatever gets them moving, gets them moving. Sharon, thoughts here?
That last thing you explained, I'm disgusted with that, okay? I'm disgusted with that. But let me say this, Doc, and perhaps I'm speaking out of turn, but what idiot lawmaker introduced that measure?
Yeah.
That measure that said if a woman, an inmate goes into labor, they have to go to the hospital. What idiot and what kind of debate was there about that? I hear crimes. I hear potential crimes throughout your chronicling, and I don't understand. Thank God the NAACP is relevant. And at the same time, doesn't it suck that they still have to do this heavy lift?
Yep.
People are dying, and somehow somebody thinks that mental illness subsides. It's cured the minute you're sentenced, apparently, because people are still dealing with it. Well, they're not actually behind bars. Isn't that stupid?
Yeah, it is. It is quite insane, to your point. You need to make a law to tell a law official to do what is already required. They're in your custody. This is a medical issue. It's like saying, if somebody gets shot, you have to take them to the hospital before you take them to jail. It's like saying that. So I get the insanity of this bill, but obviously for these cops, it was necessary because they thought it was okay, right? And you're right, it is criminal. They should have been charged with extreme negligence and obviously putting the child's life in danger.